Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
We are continuing to talk about boycotting, and we mentioned a couple of examples here. There is a store on the Taida campus, or I should say the NTU campus, which is boycotting the products of Dingxin because they think they should change their business practices, or at least they should be punished for what they did before.
Yeah.
We also mentioned the example of the land war in Ireland. That's actually where the term boycott comes from. It was involving land disputes between landlords and tenants, and the person who wanted to evict those tenants, his name was Charles Boycott. Hence, we've got the word boycott. And also we talked about the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, when a black person refused to give up her seat to a white passenger.
Rosa Parks. She's now become very, very famous, at least in America. Everybody knows her name. She was an older woman, and she just said, nope, I'm not giving that white man my seat.
Yep, she's tired. She had a rough day at work.
And she was an older lady. I think she was at least in her 50s or 60s. Come on.
Yeah, it's kind of silly, but segregation did go on in the U.S. in the past. At least legally or officially. It might still go on sort of under the table nowadays, but that's a subject for another day. Today we're going to talk about an example of boycotting that took place in Japan, something that involves the Snow brand. And they did something similar. They had a batch of milk that was infected with bacteria, but they sold it anyway. And the public kind of worked together to punish them and boycotted their products, and therefore they actually brought about some change. Let's find out what this is all about, everybody. Let's read through the entire contents of today's lesson, and we'll be right back.
Unit 13, Boycott for Change, April 22nd. Whereas a boycott is usually done for political or social reasons, it is also done as a form of consumer activism. The Snow brand boycott in Japan was a notable case. In 2000, a 3-hour power outage at Snow brand milk's factories caused a batch of milk to become infected with bacteria. The tainted milk was turned into milk products and later sold. As a result, about 15,000 Japanese people were poisoned. This sparked a public boycott, which eventually forced Snow brand milk to declare bankruptcy. The whole event also motivated the Japanese government to completely revamp their food safety laws. However, not all boycotts achieve their stated goals. In that case, what separates successful boycotts from ones that fall short? Smart boycotts target an organization or company's brand rather than simply its bottom line. They lead consumers to associate a company's brand with being illegal or unreliable. Even though a company's brand seems like something intangible, it is what connects that company to consumers and can be worth billions of dollars. This idea was clearly evidenced by the 1990s Nike boycott. Activist groups that accused the brand of using child labor not only persuaded consumers out of buying its products, but also directed the public's attention toward the company's ethics. While the short-term damage to Nike's profits was considerable, the most adverse long-term impact was on the company's reputation. Consequently, Nike has worked to rehabilitate its image and been cautious about its policies ever since. Usually, the public largely relies on the law to punish guilty manufacturers. When the law ends up letting those who are accountable off the hook, however, the public is left with few options. In the end, boycotts are expressions of dissatisfaction used as a last resort for people to make their resentment known and implement a change.
Okay, it's time now for us to discuss the contents of today's lesson. And I know you're all looking forward to it with great anticipation. So let's get to it. The title again is Boycott for Change. This is the second day we're talking about. Well, this begins with a sentence. Whereas a boycott is usually done for political or social reasons, it is also done as a form of consumer activism. So this sentence is beginning with the word whereas. Whereas, which means it's like in contrast or comparison with something. But usually this occurs later in a sentence, most often, but you can put it in the front of the sentence. So whereas a boycott, it is true that a boycott is usually done for political reasons or social reasons. Still, it is also done as a form of consumer activism. So this basically tells us the reasons why people have boycotts. Activism just means you're active with other people to try and bring about some kind of improvement or some kind of change in society. So this is consumer activism, trying to help people out, help them get better products or help them with their daily lives, things like that.
Yeah, instead of whereas, you could also say although a boycott is usually done, or you could use even though, but this is fun to use a different word there, so you can learn more on how to use that particular whereas. Well, the Snow brand boycott is what we're going to be talking about in the first part of the lesson. Snow brand is a brand that's very famous in Japan. It was famous. Now, the Snow brand boycott in Japan was a notable case. If something's notable, it's something you want to pay attention to or note. It's noteworthy. You could also say it was a noteworthy case. So in 2000, what happened? Well, the Snow brand company, they had a 3-hour power outage at their factories where they produce some milk products. Now, if you have an outage, a power outage is what we're talking about. A power outage is when you lose your power. Maybe the electricity all goes out, or maybe you have a bad storm, and that causes a power outage. It's kind of hard if you have food in a refrigerator and freezer, and you have a power outage. It happened to me in New York, and I lost all of my meat products, especially.
Oh, no.
And my milk, things that go bad or spoil if they don't have that cool air or cool temperatures. That's what happens when you have a power outage and you have to throw everything away. But look at what this company did. This company had a 3-hour power outage, which caused a batch of milk. A batch of milk is like one round of milk. So you have a batch of cookies. If you have lots of cookies you're cooking, each tray of cookies is called a batch. So it's one set or one round of cookies. This is a batch of milk. It caused all of it to become infected with bacteria. If that milk isn't kept cool enough, sometimes bacteria starts growing and we say something is infected with bacteria.
Yeah, if you cut yourself, watch out. It might get infected. You better clean it or maybe go see a doctor. That just means viruses or bacteria can start growing there and cause problems. But in this case here, this particular batch of milk became infected with bacteria. You don't want bacteria in the milk, and therefore, as a result, the milk became tainted.
Ew.
If something is tainted, that means basically it is poisoned or something bad gets inside that thing. It can be used in a lot of different situations. Tainted. There was a song in the 80s called Tainted Love, for example.
Yeah.
I guess that means our love has kind of been spoiled or polluted by something.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, the tainted milk was turned into milk products anyway, and it was later sold. I guess they said, we can't waste all that milk. We can still sell it. What's the difference? It's because of some government regulation. It's still good. Just sell it. I don't want to deal with the loss of money. It'll be okay.
We don't know why they went ahead and produced those milk products using the tainted batch. Maybe the supervisor in the factory didn't want to get into trouble and just thought, oh, it's not a big deal. It smells fine.
Yeah, it smells like milk. Must be okay.
Maybe it smelled okay at the time, but boy, you can never be too careful if you're handling milk products especially. Ooh, bad milk is really, really awful. Now, the tainted milk, I wanted to mention, guys, batch is a measure word. 量词, so just in case you're wondering what that is, it's a measure word. Now, the tainted milk was then processed and turned into milk products and later sold, like Tom said. As a result, about 15,000 Japanese people were poisoned. It doesn't say here that anyone actually died, but, if you're poisoned, perhaps it got to the point of maybe some of these people were elderly, or maybe they were very young and it hurt their little systems, their bodies more than, say, healthy adults. Maybe they had to go to the hospital. We don't know. But they probably had a terrible experience with diarrhea and maybe throwing up. We don't know. Well, this sparked a public boycott, which eventually forced that company to declare bankruptcy. If you spark something, you start it. If you're going to maybe start a fire, you need a spark to get it going, right? Well, if something sparks something else, it's something that starts another process that gets bigger.
Indeed, spark is also a noun, like in your motorcycle or your car. You've got spark plugs, or pragu, as they're called in Taiwanese or Japanese, actually, is where the word comes from, which, of course, came from English. But in any case here, yes, it sparked or it started this public boycott in Japan, and that eventually forced Snow Brand Milk to declare bankruptcy, and that's what a person or a company does when they just don't have money to pay their bills. They say, okay, I can't pay it, I'm going to declare myself bankrupt, and then what happens? The government kind of steps in and takes over or tries to pay your bills for you. I don't know. Do you have to go to jail?
Nobody pays the bills. And so those companies that were owed money
are out of luck.
Are out of luck. It's a terrible thing to happen. There are different types of bankruptcies. You're thinking about Chapter 11, which is in America, and they'll get some of the money that's owed to them. But it's terrible. It also, you'll have a bad credit record if you declare bankruptcy.
It's not good. Yeah, you don't want that to happen.
Yeah, well, the whole event also motivated the Japanese government to completely revamp their food safety laws. If something motivates you, it inspires you to take action, to do something. So it got the Japanese government thinking, hey, maybe our food safety laws aren't quite safe enough. If you revamp something, especially if it says completely revamp, it's almost like they completely rewrite or rethink their food safety laws. They're a lot tougher nowadays. For me, I've always thought of Japanese food and Japanese products as being very safe.
Yeah, well, even they can do things wrong there in Japan, although usually Japanese products, as you said, are of extremely high quality, hence they trade very well in the world market. But here, revamp just means, yes, you kind of give yourself a new form or a structure or an appearance. And in this case, for example, I could say, well, our restaurant is not doing so well. We're going to revamp our image. We're going to remodel it, repaint it, get a new menu and stuff like that, and hopefully we can improve our business. Now, let's move on now to the next paragraph, but before we do that, we're going to take a little bit of a break and have a little bit of a siesta. So please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
大家好，欢迎收听 English Digest， 我是 Sunny。今天我们要一起阅读的文章是 Unit13 Boycott for Change 第二天的课程。在第一天的课程最后，我们提到历史上一些知名的抵制活动。今天的文章继续举出一些抵制活动的例子，和之前不同的是，今天的例子是关于商业方面的。文章的第一段提到，西元2000年的时候，日本的雪印牛奶工厂因为3小时的停电，导致牛奶受到污染，而这些牛奶被制成产品，使得日本人民中毒，大众因而抵制此工厂，造成工厂宣布破产，并让日本政府重修食品安全法。我们看到第一段的第一句 Whereas a boycott is usually done for political or social reasons, it is also done as a form of consumer activism. 尽管发动抵制通常是因为政治的或是社会的原因，但抵制也作为消费者行动主义的一种形式。Whereas 是从属连接词，意思是尽管、虽然、却，用来表示让步或是对比。Whereas 后面要接一个副词子句，然后逗号，再接主要子句。也可以把 whereas 和它引导的副词子句放在主要子句的后面。Whereas 常可以和 while W-H-I-L-E 互相交换使用，只不过 whereas 的语气比较强烈，也比较正式。例如 Whereas or while Darcy is said to be bad-tempered, he is actually easy to get along with. 虽然据说达西的脾气不好，但他其实很好相处。再举一个例子 The old system is slow but simple, whereas or while the new one is fast but much more complicated to use. 旧的系统慢，但是简单，然而新的系统快，但是使用上更为复杂。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, we're back, and we're going to continue with our lesson. We just mentioned the example of Snow brand milk and the boycott that resulted in the company declaring bankruptcy, and also the Japanese government had to revamp their food safety laws. However, not all boycotts achieved their stated goals. A stated goal is like the goal that they wanted to accomplish at the beginning, before it began. There might be some kind of change, but not exactly what they wanted. And moving on to the next sentence here, it says, well, in that case, or if that's true, what separates successful boycotts from ones that fall short? Yeah, what's the difference between a successful boycott and an unsuccessful one? Something is unsuccessful when it falls short, or when it doesn't really achieve the goal that it set out to achieve at the beginning.
Yeah, well, smart boycotts, these are the successful ones. They target an organization or company's brand rather than simply its bottom line. When you're talking about a company's bottom line, you're talking about a company's profit or profit margin. If you target the brand, that's their logo. That's the name of the product that you know of. Nike would be a brand name. Dingxin is a brand name. And if you target their brand, you're targeting everything they produce. And so it's a great way to go after their brand. And your brand as a company, that's the most valuable thing you have. It's kind of intangible. Intangible means you can't touch it. But you spend more time building up your brand name through advertising and marketing and producing good products and having great customer service, that if you have your brand damaged, you're pretty much sunk, which means you're not going to be successful in the future.
Right, so the consumers will associate that brand with something bad. They'll associate it with being illegal and unreliable, and so therefore, if you attack the image, then you can basically destroy the whole company.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Indeed, and of course, that company or that brand image can be worth billions of dollars.
True.
And this idea was clearly evidenced by the 1990s Nike boycott. Evidence is usually a noun. Hey, what kind of evidence do you have to prove your case? But here it's being used as a verb. Basically, it's saying here it was clearly shown. It surely demonstrated this to us.
It was proved.
It was proved, indeed, because of the boycott against Nike back in the 1990s. Yeah, I kind of forgot about that. What's that all about? You might be asking. Well, activist groups that accuse the brand of using child labor not only persuaded consumers out of buying its products, but also directed the public's attention toward the company's ethics. So activist groups, if you're an activist, that means you're organized to try to bring about some change in society. An activist group, and they accused Nike of using child labor. You shouldn't be using kids to make your running shoes and stuff like that. So they did two things. They not only did one thing, but they also did another. They not only persuaded consumers out of buying its products. To persuade means to convince somebody to do something by giving them some kind of reason or some kind of argument. So they talked consumers into not buying its products. Don't buy its products. Use New Balance or something, or Puma or whatever.
Adidas, yeah.
I was trying to think of the different kinds of brands of running shoes.
Reebok.
There you go. That's the one I couldn't kind of think of, yeah.
I think this is really interesting, Tom, because they're using persuaded somebody out of doing something. Usually we write, you persuade someone to do something, do an action. Here you're actually persuading them out of doing something, and that's totally correct. Tom also used talk somebody into doing something. You can also talk somebody out of doing something. My parents would often try to talk me out of something I wanted to do or someplace I wanted to go because they didn't think it was safe enough for teenagers. But this is a really good way to remember this verb persuade. Persuade to do something, persuade out. Persuade somebody out of doing something. It's really cool. So if you persuade somebody, you have a lot of influence on them. You get them to do what you think is best or what you think is right. So they got consumers not to buy Nike's products, and they also directed the public's attention toward the company's ethics. Your ethics are principles that you guide your actions by. It doesn't mean that what you're doing is illegal or legal, illegal. It has more to do with your character. Is it honest? Do you have an honest, honest reputation? Do people look at you and go, yeah, they're kind of shady? If you're shady, you're doing things that are legal but not right. They're not right to do. They're wrong.
Yeah, indeed. And while the short-term damage to Nike's profits was considerable, the most adverse long-term impact was on the company's reputation. So yes, indeed, it did affect it in the short term. Their profits went down. The damage was considerable, which means it was significant. It was enough to notice here. And also, however, there was even more damage or a longer term impact and effect. It was adverse, which means it was very strong or very convincing. And it damaged their reputation. Your reputation, of course, is what people think about you. If you have a good reputation, of course, that means people respect you. They think you're pretty good. If you have a bad reputation, they think you're a huaidan, a bad person, a bad apple, and they're not going to want to have anything to do with you.
I wanted to mention adverse really does mean unfavorable or harmful, negative.
Adverse weather conditions.
Yeah, adverse weather conditions. That's a phrase you hear a lot when you're listening to the news being broadcast on the radio or TV. So consequently, what happened? They had to work to rehabilitate their image at that company. If you work to rehabilitate is to restore somebody to health. A lot of times if you've hurt your leg, arm, seriously, after you get the cast off, maybe it was broken, then you go to rehabilitation, and someone helps you get your strength back. So if you rehabilitate your image, you take a really damaged image of the company and you get your reputation back to where people look at the company and go, oh, that's a good company. They've also been very, very cautious about their policies ever since. I look at Nike now and I always think of them as doing good for society. So they've managed to rehabilitate their image and their brand image especially.
And moving on now to the next paragraph, it says, usually the public largely relies on the law or the government to punish guilty manufacturers, which of course is a company that manufactures something, creates something. And when the law ends up letting those who are accountable off the hook, however, the public is left with few options. So when the government ends up in the end, they let them off the hook. That's the phrase, to let someone off the hook. That means you just let them get away with the bad thing that they did, or sometimes people try to get off the hook and not be punished. And if you're accountable, that means you're responsible for some bad deed or bad action.
Yeah. Well, darn it, it doesn't always happen the right way. So sometimes the public is left with few options or choices when some of these manufacturers manufacturers are let off the hook. They're not held accountable. In the end, boycotts are expressions of dissatisfaction, not being happy, and they're used as a last resort. Your last resort is the only choice you have left after you've tried other things. So it's a last resort for people to make their resentment known and implement change. If you feel resentful towards somebody, you're really angry because you feel like you've been treated unfairly. And resentment, of course, is the noun form of the adjective resentful.And if you implement a change, it means you put it into practice, you put it into place. So you could put a decision or a plan or an agreement into effect by implementing it. Right now, guys, for some more explanation, we're going to listen to our Chinese teacher.
文章的第二段提到，不是所有的抵制活动都能达成目标，关键在于是否能使被抵制的对象的品牌不再受到大众的信任。而不是只有着重在让他们的收入亏损。我们看到第二段的第二句 In that case, what separates successful boycotts from ones that fall short? 那么，成功的抵制和达不到预期目标的抵制区别为何？我们来看一下这个片语 fall short， 意思是达不到标准或期待。例如 Luke is an outstanding employee.He never falls short of his boss's expectations. 陆克是一名杰出的员工，他总是能达到老板的期待。另外 short 这个形容词还可以表示短缺的、不足的。片语 be short of something 就是指缺乏什么东西。例如 The charity organization is now short of both funds and volunteers.这个慈善机构目前缺乏资金和义工。我们接着看到第二段的倒数第三句 Activist groups that accuse the brand of using child labor 一直到 toward the company's ethics 这个句子比较长，结构也很复杂，我们把它拆解成几个部分来分析。首先找出句子的主要主词，本句的主要主词就是 activist groups， 它后面的That accused the brand of using child labor 是用关系代名词 that 来引导形容词子句，用来说明是怎么样的 activist groups。再来，我们要找出句子的主要动词，本句用对等连接词 not only but also 来连接句子的两个主要动词，那就是 persuaded 和 directed。所以这整个句子在说的就是指控奈吉使用童工的行动团体。不只说服消费者不要买他的产品，而且把大众的注意力转向奈吉的道德。当我们在遇到比较长、比较复杂的句子的时候，可以试着先找出句子的主要主词和动词，这样句子的结构也就一目了然了。文章的最后一段提到，抵制其实是最后不得已的手段，通常是发生在政府无法处罚违法的人。人民只好用抵制来表达不满，并希望现况能有所改变。我们看到最后一段的第二句，这里说到 The law ends up letting those who are accountable off the hook. 法律最后让应负责任的人脱身。这里有一个片语 let somebody off the hook. Hook 是名词，意思就是挂钩或是钓鱼钩。想象你在钓鱼的时候，鱼因为咬住了钓钩而无法脱身。所以 let somebody off the hook 就引申用来指让某人脱离困境。例如 The teacher hasn't let those who cheated on the exam off the hook easily. 这名老师没有轻易的放过考试作弊的学生。以上就是今天的课程讲解，谢谢大家。
Okay, everybody, that brings us to the end of our program for today. Hopefully you will get involved in some kind of boycott activities. If you feel your cause is just, we wish you the best of luck. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.